Coming up now on Michael Coren Live, a very controversial book, The Holocaust Industry, a controversial man, Norman Finkelstein. Join me over there, please. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Michael Coren Live. Now, I promoted this last night as being a very controversial show, and I don't think that is redundant language, or I don't think I'm being hysterical either. Everything that's meant to be controversial today, generally it isn't. But there are certain issues and certain subjects where debate can be difficult. This book is The Holocaust Industry, and Norman Finkelstein is the author. He's written other books too. I suppose this is the central thesis, and it has got him into all sorts of trouble and also won him many fans and supporters. Some of them he probably actually wouldn't want to have, but we'll get to that a bit later. The lines will be very busy indeed. Every time we touch issues that concern the Middle East or Jewish people, I say this, and generally it's a forlorn hope. But if you really are a racist, a bigot, and a hater, it ain't the station for you. Go somewhere else. I will give you very little time, if any. Intelligent, open, free debate and discussion is what we're looking for. Hatred, just won't tolerate it. Okay. The toll-free number, remember, we have that now, 1-866-956-5555. The other number's 416-203-0302 and 905-332-3131. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Controversial, I can't not use the word. It's been overused and it's hackneyed, but you are extremely controversial. Why is that?
Well, I think I say things in the book which many people have said in private, within and outside the Jewish community, but which hasn't been publicly said. And I was the first person, I think, to publicly say what many people were privately saying. That, I think, is the main source of the controversy, because I don't actually think my findings are particularly controversial. What I have to say is not really shocking. What's shocking is that it's being said in public.
What is it? What's the central thesis of your book?
Well, basically, the central thesis of the book is that American Jewish organizations have exploited the Nazi Holocaust for political and financial gain.
Mm-hmm. Go on.
Basically, the Holocaust was first used by American Jewish organizations as an ideological weapon to deflect criticism of Israel. And in more recent years, it's basically turned into an extortion racket, a shakedown, where the colossal suffering of the Jewish people is being exploited by Jewish organizations to extract, mostly on false pretenses, what's called Holocaust compensation monies from European governments. And once the monies are extracted, extorted is the accurate word, once the monies are extorted from these governments, in fact, the actual survivors never see any of the monies. So as I point out in the last chapter of my book, it's a double shakedown. It's a shakedown of the European governments on whom demands are made for which there's no evidence to support those demands. And once the monies are being extracted, extorted, then the actual survivors are being shaken down.
So you're saying there's been an exploitation of the Holocaust?
Yes, there's been a consistent political exploitation of the Holocaust to deflect criticisms of legitimate criticism of Israel's crimes against the Palestinians. And now there's exploitation which has reduced the colossal suffering of the Jewish people during World War II, has reduced that suffering to the moral stature of a Monte Carlo casino. And that's deeply offensive, besides being immoral.
I respect strong, firm history. Using a term like Monte Carlo casino, is that the language of a serious historian?
Well, the question...
Or someone who is perhaps trying to exploit the Holocaust?
Well, the question is whether the language is an apt description of what's going on. If it's an apt description, the language is appropriate. If it's an inapt description, the language is inappropriate. I think let's leave me aside for the moment. Let's take the world's greatest authority in the Nazi Holocaust. Nobody will dispute that the greatest living authority by a wide margin is Raoul Hilberg, the author of the classical study, The Destruction of the European Jews. There isn't even any scholar who even remotely approaches him in scholarly or moral authority. Now, way before I came along, way before Norman Finkelstein came along, Raoul Hilberg was saying over and over again that American Jewry, that's his term, American Jewry was extorting and blackmailing money from Switzerland. Now, I ask you, is using terms like extortion and blackmail, is that the language of a historian? Well, if it's not, then you're telling me, or you're disqualifying Raoul Hilberg from consideration as a historian.
What you've done, which is also, I think, and I'm not much of a historian, I mean, my degree on my postgraduate work is in history, but certainly there's a major, fundamental and profound difference between using words like extortion, which are certainly within the vocabulary, and comparing something that concerns the death of millions of people to a fun time in a resort in Europe.
Well, when I say a Monte Carlo casino, I say it's reduced the suffering of the Jewish people, which I take very seriously. I know I'm sometimes accused nowadays of exploiting the suffering of my parents, but
Your parents were in death camps.
My parents were in the Warsaw Ghetto from September 1939 to May 1943. My father was then taken to Auschwitz concentration camp. My mother was in Majdanek concentration camp, and they were there through the duration of the war. On both sides of my family, every single member was exterminated. I never had an aunt, I never had an uncle, I never had a grandparent. I didn't even have a concept of relatives. And nobody, I think, who knows me will deny that I was deeply invested in my parents' well-being and in their memory. And I think it is deeply offensive when organizations like the World Jewish Congress, the Jewish Claims Conference, when they use that suffering in order to extract monies, when they parade Holocaust survivors in front of cameras to extract monies, and then, after extracting the money, extorting the money, blackmailing the money, and then to inflict a new suffering on the survivors by denying them any of the monies that they have gotten. I mean, it's very difficult, it really is very difficult to conceive of any lower tactic than the one these organizations have engaged in.
I've met survivors. I've met two various types of survivors. I've met survivors who have received money. I've also met survivors who've been offered money and said, no, I don't think it would be appropriate for me to have any money from this. I'd rather it went back to you to fight anti-Semitism and to fight for causes for the Jewish people. But you're saying that absolutely no survivor of a death camp ever got any money from these Jewish organizations?
I'm not saying that, oh yeah, from the Jewish organizations. Let me just give you an example from my own family, and I can assure you, and I can supply ample documentation, it's not at all atypical of what happened. My late father, he incurred a very serious injury to his skull in Auschwitz, and he received quite a substantial pension from Germany. Relatively speaking, you can never say, you know, what would be adequate compensation. Sure. But by the end of his life, he was receiving approximately $600 a month from Germany, and it would have come, all told, for his entire life, it would have come to about $250,000. He never, even though he loathed Germans, as did my mother, never discriminated between good Germans and bad Germans, Nazis and Germans. He hated them all.
Hardly surprising. I don't think we can expect political correctness.
I never faulted him, and I never argued the point. I think it would have been audacious of me to try to even argue the point. I never bothered to. On the other hand, he never, ever uttered a single word of anger about the issue of the compensation. He was actually, you know, quite satisfied. After all, as I'm sure you know, very seldom do victims of war ever receive compensation, and very seldom from the side that inflicted the wounds. On the other side, my late mother, for reasons which are a little bit too complicated to get into on this program. She did not receive compensation from the German government, but the German government provided what was called and still is the Jewish Claims Conference, which with a huge sum of money, which was supposed to be used to compensate the survivors. In fact, all my mother received was $3,000 from Germany. She never received a dime from the Jewish organizations.
Got to stop you there.